Good evening, everybody. Alrighty, good to see you all as always. Congratulations on making it to another practice as always. I believe we're on day 23. Beautiful stuff. So, second day of, discussing this concept of samsara. And so I wanted to take a second before we get into sort of the value of this concept in through a few different sort of domains. I just wrote a little list to express all the ways in which life, or some of the ways in which life does in fact move through cycles. And so if you just want to take a second and as I, share this list, really consider the reality of these points. Galaxies. Galaxies spiral in the void of space, right? In their cycles, in their orbits. The solar systems within galaxies, the spin of planets and stars within the solar systems, the moons around their planets, in that the seasons spiral, and then the migration of animals, which often follows the seasons, the tides, our breath, emotional states. All emotional states run through cycles, and that means happiness comes and happiness goes. Joy comes, joy goes. Sorrow comes, sorrow goes. Energy states. You're in a high energy state, you're in a low energy state. Hunger comes and goes. Sleep comes and goes. Our heartbeat and blood flow, blinking, bowel movements. And so, these are all deeply physical and deeply rooted in our biology or in nature, but there are also, more subtle expressions of cyclical nature. And one that came to mind was reconnecting with past friends. When someone from your past sort of makes their way back into your life, this would be a way of perceiving samsara. And the same with interests, the resurrection of old interests out of nowhere. And then the final, probably most obscure, would be deja vu, right? The sense that you're looking into a moment and it feels like you've been there before, which is a phenomenon of the mind, but would still, in a subtle way, reflect that life is sort of taking you for a ride, and that ride is a loop. So, this cyclical nature, what does it really mean cosmologically? What does it mean to us as like living organisms, as animals? And then what does it mean to us as psychological organisms, as human beings? And so the willingness to appreciate samsara really allows us to understand the depth in which life is death and life is rebirth. And because Hinduism, Buddhism, and yoga, they all come from a foundation that believes in reincarnation. Because we only have one life to live, we aren't aware of the past lives, we aren't aware of our future lives. The yogis looked into nature and saw this reoccurrent pattern of resurrection. Again, the sun resurrecting every day, the crops resurrecting when the seasons are right. And because their sense of separation, their sense of separation and disconnection from what is natural, what is nature, was less than ours. I feel as modern people, unconsciously, there's a huge disconnect between the laws that govern reality and ourselves. The yogis assume that what happens in nature happens to every dimension of themselves, and because the sun is reborn every 24 hours, they will be reborn in some capacity every lifetime, and that death is fundamentally just a journey into the night of the soul. And so appreciating cycles, appreciating the sun rising and setting, affords us this opportunity to really feel how deep and immutable death and resurrection is. And that's an intense and creative idea for a lot of us, but it's just something to consider. What samsara allows us to do as animals, right? As animals, we're trying to negotiate our environment to ensure survival. As we learn to appreciate patterns, cyclical patterns, it makes life predictable. And I think the clearest example of this is when we as a species learned the cyclical nature of the seasons and then learned to utilize those seasons to develop agriculture. Because we learned of those cycles and those patterns, we took advantage of it and then sort of developed this whole new industry and this whole new way of life that ensured, an easier, more abundant existence. And so when we learn to look into our own minds and appreciate the birth and death of our own emotional states, our focus and our distraction, our high or our low energy, and when we understand that that is immutable, that will never change no matter how much energy we put into it, the upsurge of boredom, for example, or the upsurge of impatience, because you know it is supposed to come, not that it did come, but that it must come, you're less bothered by it because, again, you understand that it's law, it's not a surprise, and in that you can sort of manage peace while the tides of the mind and the ups and downs of circumstance sort of move as they must and as they should. And so predictability is a really beautiful consequence of understanding samsara. And then the last is, as psychological beings, the value of understanding cyclical nature is repetition. And so the way that a yogi or a meditator interacts with life itself, we've been touching upon this at the end of the last few classes by, bringing our hands to heart center and saying, Namaste, I see you world, it's you and me right now. The way a meditator interacts with life, with reality, is that of a teacher, in that every bee, every shadow, every mosquito, every breath, every gust of wind, every phenomenon inside that reality is there to inform the meditator in some capacity, whether it's actually sort of taken in or overlooked. Everything is there to inform the meditator on how to become more conscious and how to live more harmonically with with existence itself. And so by appreciating the cyclical nature of that reality, what this allows us to do is move through the same lessons over and over and over again. So samsara provides a repeat or a repetition of opportunity until we have enough understanding to actually learn the lesson and move forward. And I think we've all been in situations where it's like you had to go through the same mistakes a few times before you actually understood what you were doing, whether that is very literal or more sort of figurative. But after the third or fourth or fifth time of making the same mistake, then finally you as the student put the pieces together and move forward. And so, again, as a meditator, because life is this cosmic teacher, there are many lessons sort of hurtling to us many times over. And life is sort of this hopeful master. It's like one day you'll sort of get the point, and in that step forward into like a greater experience of harmony, something that we as individuals as of yet don't comprehend, right? We haven't learned the lesson yet, but the lesson is on its way back around. And so these are some nice ways to think of the idea. When we get into our practice today, however, I think the practical value of this concept is that it allows us to find some ease with the ups and downs of focus and distraction in particular. And so what we're going to study, of course, while you're meditating, focus on the tingling sensations in your body and do your best to stay there, tethered to those sensations and moving away from analysis, moving away from memory, moving away from fantasy or from planning and strategizing. But when the mind does inevitably make its way back into thought, into distraction, appreciate it under the context of cyclical nature. And what you should immediately find is you are more tolerant of this inevitable sort of shifting away from focus. And then there's this faith that you don't have to really do anything. You can wander in your thoughts as long as you want. Eventually, not by your own choice, but eventually you will come back into focus. And so what this permits us to do is sort of let go of the steering wheel. I explained this yesterday, and just sort of sit doing nothing inside our minds, inside ourselves. And this is where the experience of peace and the experience of ease that meditation is sort of known for really starts to come up in that internal space. Cool, so let's get into this today. Comfortable seated position. Tighten the cross of your legs, tilt the hips forward, feel the spine lengthen. Draw your shoulder blades down your back to broaden your chest and collarbone. Straighten your arms. And bring a random finger to each thumb. Your palms are pointing up towards the ceiling. Jaw is shut. Press your tongue into the back of your 2 front teeth and do your best to relax your muscles on the bone. Now slow down the breath, of course, breathing into the belly. And as you exhale, keep the spine tall, yanking the abdomen in towards the spine. Active exhales. As you still your body and shut your eyes and slow your breath, internalization, the mind starts to look inwardly. And in that, for whatever reason, your ability to be sincere is provoked. You become more real to yourself. In the same way that tasting a delicious piece of food, people often close their eyes to make that morsel of flavor more real. And so our attention determines reality. You are becoming more sincere because you are paying attention to yourself. And because self is the center point of your personal existence, everything that branches out from self is consequently also more real. And so here's the evidence. Think about our solar system. And think about our galaxy, the Milky Way. Think about our planets orbiting the sun. Think about our solar system orbiting the black hole in the center of the Milky Way, and all of it spiraling through space. Slow down your breath. Think about the spin of the Earth and the orbit of the moon, and from that, the seasons. And consider the millions of individual animals that follow the seasons in great migrations. Feel your beating heart. Feel blood flowing through your veins and arteries, leaving and returning to your heart, migrating through the body. Consider the rise and fall and resurrection of hunger and sleep, of happiness, of sorrow, of certainty, of confusion. Everything is here, and then it's not here, and then it's here again. Everything is touched by this sort of death and rebirth. Everything. Let's take a couple moments to savor this. A principal law of reality, of nature. And notice that as you look into this detail of nature, it feels good. It's the pleasure of knowledge, the euphoria of insight. When you start to feel this in your body, when the epiphany strikes, seal it by repeating the word samsara. When we become more and more familiar with the cyclical design of nature, and we understand how deep it really goes into every one of our cells, through every one of our thoughts, those cycles, those births, deaths, and rebirths become predictable. And in that, when anger rises, when loneliness rises, when dissatisfaction rises, we aren't surprised. We greet it as a meditator would. Hello, old friend. I was expecting you. And when the positive dissolves, happiness, confidence, understanding, energy, youth, when these things leave, we can say goodbye mindfully as a meditator does. I'll see you again. As all things come and go, they bring with them lessons. And the fundamental lesson is the one thing that does not rise and fall is what we are looking for, consciousness. The thing we are most grateful for, consciousness. And so in today's class, focus on the sensations of your body. When the mind wanders, notice that. Focus dissolves, distraction emerges. And then notice on its own the impulse to refocus comes back, the resurrection. I'd also like you to monitor the rise and fall and rebirth of interest. For a moment you are enthused, then you are disenchanted, and again, all by itself, enthusiasm comes back. From time to time, as you feel these cycles moving within your psyche, label it samsara and really build a bond with this idea. Slow down your breath. Observe these patterns. Slow down the breath. And very slowly, straighten the arms if they've bent. And as you adjust your breathing and posture, notice that creates more wakefulness inside the body, which extends into the mind, which can be leveraged to create more focus. Feel the tingling sensations of your body. The laws that govern the solar systems and the galaxies, the seasons and the tides, the laws that govern death and rebirth, govern every inch of our being. Not even our most personal thoughts are exempt from samsara. Nothing lasts, not focus or distraction, not happiness, not depression. But to observe that pattern in the depths of your most personal space, that is illuminating, because it informs you that you are absolutely a part of this. And to embrace that is humbling and grounding. And so let your mind, your thinking mind, move through the cycle. Let it focus and distract as it pleases. Let your energy levels rise and fall as they wish. It's not a disruption. Observe all of it. And in that, start to feel that some deeper part of you is observing samsara. That your focus point is distraction, is focus. Your focus point is low energy, is high energy. And now the idea of doing nothing and being nothing should be more real. In Buddhism, samsara is not just cycles, but suffering. When we are unconscious of our habitual impulses, we suffer. When we are conscious of samsara, when we are conscious of these cycles, we experience liberation. And so in this moment, you are observing the most subtle dimension of these cyclical patterns within your psyche. And as they play out in front of you, notice a peace, a tranquility. This is, of course, the consequence of your nervous system, generated through your deep breathing. But it is enriched through these particular points of view. So as you embrace the ups and downs, the looping, the repetition, a center of peace becomes more real. Take 3 more breaths. Slow it down. Slowly bring your hands to heart center. The etiquette of your practice, this is the peak experience. Increased sincerity. And so again, it's just you and the world, the soul and the divine, Atman and Brahman, consciousness and reality. One is a student, the other is a teacher. The lesson, of course, is samsara. In this moment of peak focus, peak presence, peak openness, again attempt to recognize the philosophy in real time. The more aware you are of it, the more peace you should experience. Now repeat the word namaste to the world, to reality, to Brahman. Namaste to samsara, namaste to the cyclical pattern, to the whirlpool. Thumb knuckles to third eye center. What is the principal skill? Focus. Feel a tingling sensation. Take 1 more exhale, hold the breath with nothing in your lungs. And so here you want to push your edge. Try to hold your breath a bit longer than you want to. Release your wrists to your knees. Nice tall spine, keep holding the breath. When you need to inhale, slowly through the nose. Again, hold the breath. Holding, holding, holding. And as your lungs are now full of air, or you're breathing normally. Repeat birth, death, and rebirth. Nothing is immune. With your next breath in, open the eyes. I am still meditating. Everything is still moving through the cycle.